in the dust-choked armory of Forward Operating Base Kestrel. The deadliest weapon wasn't the 330 Lapua Magnum resting on the workbench. It was the quiet, unassuming woman oiling its bolt. They treated her like the maid. They didn't know her trigger finger had already rewritten Special Operations history. Forward Operating Base Kestrel sat like a bruised knuckle on the jagged edge of the Syrian border. It was a place of relentless heat, blowing sand, and the constant, thrumming tension of a war that officially didn't exist. Inside the compound, past the blast walls and the hum of diesel generators, sat the armory. It was a stiflingly hot shipping container retrofitted with weapon racks and workbenches, reeking of gunpowder, sweat, and CLP cleaner, lubricant preservative. This was where they put her. Petty Officer First Class Elena Jenkins was an anomaly. 2 years prior, the Pentagon had quietly lifted the final veils of restriction on women in Tier 1 Special Operations. Elena had endured the agonizing crucible of basic underwater demolition, SAIL, BUDS, ASL, DS training. Surviving Hell Week with stress fractures in both shins and a quiet burning resolve that terrified her instructors. She had earned her trident. But earning the trident and earning the respect of a blooded, insular Debagru platoon were two entirely different battlefields. When she was attached to Bravo platoon, the reception was frostier than a winter insertion in the Hindu Kush. To the veteran operators of Bravo, she was a political liability, an experiment forced upon them by brass sitting in air-conditioned offices in Washington. "Hey, Jenkins," a voice barked, shattering the hum of the armory's industrial fan. It was Petty Officer Second Class Hayes, a hulking breacher with a jawline like an anvil and an ego to match. He tossed a heavily modified Mk13 Mod 7 sniper rifle onto her workbench. It clattered against the metal, a blatant display of disrespect for the precision instrument. "Rifle's running dirty," Hayes sneered, leaning against the doorframe, crossing his thick arms. "Action is sticky. Tear it down, clean it, and make sure the optics aren't bumped. Staff Sergeant Cole needs it pristine for tonight's op." "We're doing real work." Elena didn't look up immediately. She finished applying a drop of lubricant to the firing pin of an M4 carbine, wiped her hands on a grease-stained rag, and finally turned her pale, icy blue eyes toward Hayes. "I'll take care of it," she said. Her voice was flat, devoid of the irritation Hayes was desperately trying to provoke. Hayes snorted. "Just make sure you do. Leave the trigger pulling to the men tonight. You just keep the brass shiny." He turned and swaggered out into the blazing sunlight. Elena watched him go, her expression unreadable. She picked up the Mk13. To her, it wasn't just a rifle. It was an extension of the human nervous system. She popped the takedown pins, sliding the bolt out with practiced fluid grace. As she examined the weapon, she frowned. Staff Sergeant Cole was Bravo platoon's primary sniper, a man who boasted loudly of his deployment records. But looking at his weapon, Elena saw the truth. The barrel was severely copper-fouled, indicating he hadn't properly solvent-cleaned it after his last range day. Worse, as she checked the Schmidt and Bender scope, she noticed the mounting rings were unevenly torqued. It was a millimeter of difference, but at 1,000 yards, that millimeter would translate to a missed target. She didn't complain. She didn't march out and publicly humiliate Cole. She simply went to work. For the next 3 hours, Elena existed in a state of zen. She stripped the rifle down to its component parts, cleaning the bore until it gleamed like a mirror. She retorqued the scope rings to the exact inch-pound specifications, truing the reticle. She checked the ballistic computer attached to the spotting scope, updating the atmospheric data barometric pressure, temperature, humidity specific, to the high-altitude valley they were hitting that night. Chief Warrant Officer David O'Connor, the platoon commander and a grizzled veteran of Fallujah, walked into the armory just as she was finishing. He was the only man on the base who had read Elena's full, unredacted file. "Are you giving you grief again, Jenkins?" O'Connor asked quietly, leaning against the metal wall. "Nothing I can't handle, boss," Elena replied, racking the bolt of Cole's rifle. It glided forward like glass on glass, locking with a satisfying, crisp click. O'Connor sighed, rubbing the graying stubble on his chin. "You know you don't have to take it. You could show them your jacket. Tell them about Yemen." Elena paused, her hands resting on the cold steel of the barrel. Yemen. 2 years ago, as part of a highly classified Joint Special Operations Task Force, she had been caught in an ambush. A spotter was killed. Her primary rifle was destroyed. Using a battlefield-salvaged Macmillan TAC 338, she had held off 24 al-Qaeda militants for 14 hours from a rocky outcropping, registering 22 confirmed kills, including an enemy commander at a staggering distance of 2,100 yards through heavy crosswinds. It was a shot that defied the laws of physics and cemented her as a ghost in the JSOC community, but her file was heavily classified to protect the existence of the Female Integration Pilot Program. To Bravo Platoon, she was just the new girl who hadn't seen real combat. "A jacket doesn't earn respect, Chief," Elena said softly, looking up at him. "Only performance does. Besides, let Cole think he's the apex predator. It keeps him confident. He'll need it tonight." O'Connor nodded slowly, a profound respect in his eyes. "Wheels up at 2200 hours. Operation Sand Viper. Rig grabbing a high-value target in the Shura Valley. You're riding with the quick reaction force in the trailing MRAP. If things go sideways, you're the backup." "Understood. Watch your back out there, Wraith," O'Connor said, using her classified call sign. Elena offered a rare, thin smile. "I always do." The Shura Valley was a jagged, unforgiving scar in the earth, flanked by towering limestone cliffs that trapped the heat of the day and released it as a suffocating thermal blanket at night. The convoy of heavily armored MRAPs cut their headlights miles out, navigating by the eerie green glow of night vision goggles. Elena sat in the cramped rear of the third vehicle, the heavy vibrations of the diesel engine rattling her bones. Her personal weapon, a custom-built, suppressed 300 Winchester Magnum that she had assembled piece by piece in her off hours, was secured tightly between her knees. Ahead of them, Bravo Platoon's assault element, led by Chief O'Connor, dismounted. They moved like phantoms toward a cluster of mud brick compounds terraced into the mountainside. Intelligence indicated that a key insurgent bomb maker was hiding there, protected by a heavily armed security detail. Staff Sergeant Cole, carrying the MK-13 that Elena had meticulously tuned, peeled off with his spotter to take a position on an overlooking ridge. His job was to provide overwatch, scanning the compound for threats and covering the assault team's approach. Elena's orders were explicit: stay with the vehicles. Guard the rear. It was an insult disguised as a tactical assignment. Hayes had made a point to smirk at her as he racked his M4 and disappeared into the darkness. For the first 20 minutes, the radio chatter was crisp and professional. All for one, approaching target building. Overwatch is set. Could sight lines on the courtyard. Then the valley erupted. It didn't start with a single shot, but with a deafening roar. An improvised explosive device, ID, buried deep beneath the dirt road leading to the compound, detonated. The shockwave rattled the windows of Elena's MRAP. Immediately the night was torn apart by the staccato rhythm of AK-47 fire and the terrifying heavy thud of a DSHK 12.7mm anti-aircraft machine gun firing from an elevated fortified cave above the compound. Tracer rounds lit up the valley like a deadly neon rain. "Contact! Contact right!" Hayes screamed over the comms, his voice laced with the sudden raw edge of panic. "We are pinned down in the courtyard." Taking heavy plunging fire from the ridgeline, Elena leaned forward, staring intently at the tactical radio. "Overwatch, this is O'Connor. Suppress that DHK, now." There was an agonizing silence on the Overwatch frequency. Then a ragged, breathless voice broke through. It was Cole's spotter. "Boss, Cole is hit. I repeat, Cole is down." Took a round to the shoulder. "He's out of the fight. We are combat ineffective." And the MRAP, the driver, swore violently. The assault team was trapped in the kill zone. Without sniper support to neutralize the heavy machine gun, they would be shredded in minutes. "This is Alpha," O'Connor's voice cracked over the net. Cool but urgent. "Move up and provide covering fire." "Negative, Alpha," the QRF commander replied. "The road is blocked by the IED crater. We can't push the trucks up." Elena didn't ask for permission. She didn't wait for orders. She popped the heavy armored door of the MRAP and slipped out into the chaotic night, her 300 Win Mag in hand. "Jenkins, get back here," the QRF commander yelled, but she was already gone, melting into the shadows of the rocks. She moved with terrifying speed and total silence, her boots finding purchase on the loose shale. She bypassed the main road, climbing a steep, treacherous goat path that flanked the convoy. She was doing the math in her head, analyzing the battle space. The enemy DHK was positioned high, approximately 850 yards from her current location. The wind was howling down the valley, a tricky crosswind that was shifting between 5 and 12 miles per hour. She found a flat rock outcropping that offered a clear line of sight to the muzzle flashes of the enemy machine gun. She dropped to her stomach, deploying her bipod. This was her world. The noise, the screaming, the explosions, they all faded away. The universe shrank to the size of her scope's objective lens. She breathed in the cord-eyed laced air. She looked through her optic. The world turned green. She spotted the DSHK nest. It was heavily sandbagged, leaving only a narrow slit for the gunner. Distance 864 yards, elevation 12 degrees up. Wind 8 miles per hour from the left. Elena adjusted her turrets. She didn't have a spotter to call her wind or watch her trace. She was entirely alone. She chambered around, the bolt gliding silently. Down in the courtyard, Hayes was huddled behind the crumbling mud wall. Dust and rock fragments rained down on him as the DSHK chewed through the cover. He looked at O'Connor, fear finally replacing the arrogance in his eyes. They were going to die here. Elena exhaled slowly, letting her lungs empty. She paused at the bottom of her breath, the natural respiratory pause. Her finger applied 2 pounds of pressure to the trigger. Crack, the suppressed 1400 Win mag bucked against her shoulder. The bullet traveled at 2,900 feet per second. It cut through the chaotic crosswinds, arced slightly over the valley, and slipped perfectly through the 4-inch gap in the enemy sandbags. Down in the courtyard, the deafening roar of the DSHK suddenly, miraculously, stopped. Hayes blinked, wiping dirt from his eyes. What happened? Did Cole wake up? Before anyone could answer, 2 more enemy fighters rushed to man the heavy gun. Crack, crack. 2 more shots rang out from the darkness of the lower ridge. Both fighters dropped instantly, eliminated before their hands even touched a weapon. "Overwatch, is that you?" O'Connor yelled into the comms. "Negative, boss," the spotter replied. We hadn't fired a shot. Hayes stared into the darkness, bewildered. Then who the hell is shooting? High on the ridge, Elena smoothly racked the bolt, ejecting a smoking brass casing. She didn't celebrate. She immediately began scanning for secondary targets. She spotted 3 insurgents attempting to flank Bravo platoon's right side, moving through an olive grove at 600 yards. She adjusted her windage hold, tracked the lead runner, and fired. The man collapsed mid-stride. The other 2 dove for cover, terrified by the invisible death raining down on them. "They're suppressed," O'Connor roared, seizing the moment. Assault element, push the target building. Move, move, move. As Bravo platoon surged forward, breaching the compound and neutralizing the remaining threats, Elena systematically dismantled the enemy's perimeter defense. She fired 12 rounds. She registered 12 hits. Every time an insurgent popped their head up, every time they tried to maneuver, a perfectly calculated 220-grain bullet found them. She controlled the entire battlefield from the shadows, a singular force of nature dictating who lived and who died in the Shura Valley. 20 minutes later, the compound was secured. The HVT was inzip-tized. Alpha is secure. Target packaged. O'Connor breezed over the radio. Who the hell was providing that overwatch? Eleanor slung her rifle over her shoulder. She gathered her brass casings, leaving no trace, and silently climbed back down the goat path. By the time Bravo platoon marched back to the MRAPs, exhausted, battered, and carrying the wounded Cole, Elena was already sitting in the back of her designated vehicle. She had a rag in her hand, calmly wiping the Syrian dust off the barrel of her rifle. Hayes walked up to the open door of the MRAP. He was covered in chalky dust and blood from a graze on his cheek. He looked at Elena, then down at the custom sniper rifle resting on her lap. The suppressor was still radiating a faint heatwave in the cool night air. He opened his mouth to speak, to ask, but the words died in his throat. Elena looked up, her icy blue eyes meeting his. "You guys good?" she asked, her voice as flat and unassuming as it had been in the armory. Hayes swallowed hard, staring at the woman he had treated like a janitor just hours ago. He finally realized that he hadn't just survived an ambush. He had been saved by the deadliest predator in the desert. "Yeah, Jenkins," Hayes whispered, his voice trembling slightly. "We're good." The medevac helicopter tore through the pre-dawn sky, its rotors beating the heavy Syrian air into a frantic dust storm as it touched down at Forward Operating Base Kestrel. Medical personnel sprinted toward the bird, loading the pale, blood-soaked form of Staff Sergeant Cole. He would live, but his shoulder was shattered. His war was over. As the chopper banked away, leaving a lingering smell of aviation fuel, the atmosphere inside the base was thick with an uneasy silence. Bravo platoon, usually loud and full of post-mission adrenaline, sat in the staging area like statues. Hayes sat on a crate of ammunition, staring at his boots. The graze on his cheek had been bandaged, but he barely felt the sting. He kept replaying the ambush in his mind, the deafening roar of the D-K, the crushing realization that they were going to die in that courtyard, and then the sudden, clinical elimination of their enemies by a shooter who didn't officially exist on the battlefield. Inside the Joint Operations Center, JOC, the temperature was frigid. Fluorescent lights buzzed harshly overhead as Chief Warrant Officer O'Connor stood at attention before Captain Richard Miller, a JSOP task force commander who had flown in hours earlier. Miller was a man who lived by spreadsheets and standard operating procedures. He did not like variables. "Explain to me," Miller began, his voice dangerously low as he pointed to the drone footage playing on the main monitor, "how a junior armorer abandoned her post in the QRF, broke protocol, and engaged 12 enemy combatants without authorization or a spotter." "With respect, sir," O'Connor replied smoothly, "Petty Officer Jenkins didn't break protocol. She adapted to a catastrophic battlefield failure. Overwatch was neutralized. The assault element was pinned. If she hadn't moved, you'd be writing letters to the families of 12 dead SEALs right now." Miller narrowed his eyes. "I don't care how good a shot she got off, Chief. She's support staff. She's a political integration project. I'm recommending her for an Article 15 for insubordination." And the heavy metal door of the JOC swung open. Petty Officer Second Class Hayes walked in, still wearing his dusty combat rig, his rifle slung across his chest. Behind him stood the rest of Bravo platoon. "Hayes, you are out of line. Get out of my JOC," Miller barked. Hayes didn't flinch. He walked straight up to Miller's desk. "Sir, I respectfully request that you drop any disciplinary action against Jenkins. Furthermore, I request she be officially slotted as Bravo's primary sniper." Miller laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. "You want to put the armory girl on the line because she got lucky in the dark." "It wasn't luck, sir," Hayes said, his voice dropping to a gravelly register. "I was there. I saw the hits. 800 yards, shifting crosswinds, total darkness, no spotter. She took out a fortified D-K nest with 2 shots. She didn't miss once. She saved my life. She saved all our lives. If she's not on the gun, Bravo doesn't roll." Miller looked at the faces of the hardened operators standing behind Hayes. They were nodding in silent agreement. The men who had shunned Delaney yesterday were now ready to mutiny for her. Before Miller could formulate a response, Specialist Davies, an intelligence analyst sitting at a nearby terminal, spun around, his face completely drained of color. "Captain," Davies interrupted, his voice shaking, "we have a massive problem. The HVT we pulled from the compound. Tariq." The interrogators just tracked his phone. Miller snapped his attention to the analyst. "What did they find?" "The ambush in the Shura Valley, sir. It wasn't a defensive posture. It was a holding action." Davies pulled up a topographical map on the main screen, overlaying it with angry red heat signatures. "Tariq let himself be captured to draw Bravo platoon out. While we were focused on the valley, 200 heavily armed insurgents moved into the mountains surrounding FOB Kestrel. They're forming a perimeter right now." O'Connor's blood ran cold. "They're going to overrun the base, sir." Davies swallowed hard. "Intercepted radio chatter indicates they have an armored VBIED, a vehicle-borne improvised explosive device. They plan to breach the main gate and then swarm the compound. Estimated time to contact is less than 20 minutes. The JOC erupted into chaotic immediate action. Miller began shouting orders, calling for close air support, but the response from command was bleak. A severe sandstorm was rolling in from the east. Fast movers and Apaches were grounded. They were entirely on their own. O'Connor grabbed his radio. "Base defense condition 1. All hands to the walls. This is not a drill." Hayes turned and sprinted out of the JOC, heading straight for the armory. When he burst through the door, Elena was calmly loading armor-piercing incendiary tracer Apita prunes into the massive box magazine of a Barrett M107A 1.5 caliber anti-materiel rifle. She had already heard the alarms. Hayes stopped, catching his breath. He looked at her, truly looking at her for the first time. He didn't see a political experiment. He saw a warrior who had already done the math on their survival. "They're coming," Hayes said, his voice tight. "I know," Elena replied, slamming the heavy magazine home. She racked the massive bolt, chambering around the size of a cigar. She looked up at Hayes, her icy blue eyes flashing with a dangerous, predatory calm. "Where do you need me, Hayes?" Hayes gave her a grim, respectful nod. "Take the roof of the comms tower. It's the highest vantage point. We're going to need a ghost up there, Jenkins, because all hell is about to break loose." The attack began not with a battle cry, but with the terrifying shrill whistle of incoming mortars. Toop, 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 thump. Explosions walked across the gravel yard of Fob Kestrel, shattering windows and tossing sandbags into the air. The night sky suddenly lit up with the chaotic geometry of green and red tracer fire. From the roof of the communications tower, 60 feet above the dusty ground, Elena Jenkins lay prone. The heavy barrel of her Barrett M107A 1.5 caliber anti-materiel rifle rested on its bipod. Below her, Hayes and O'Connor were on the western wall, laying down punishing suppressive fire with MiG 240 machine guns, struggling to hold back waves of fighters surging from the rocky waddies. "Took, this is Wall West. We are taking heavy RPG fire from the tree line." Hayes screamed over the tactical net. Eleanor adjusted her headset. "Wall West, this is Wraith. I have your sector. Keep your heads down." Looking through her high-powered thermal optic, she spotted the distinct bloom of a rocket-propelled grenade launcher 400 yards out. She exhaled, calculated the wind drift in a fraction of a second, and squeezed the trigger. The must Barrett roared, spitting a fireball. The half-inch armor-piercing round crossed the distance in a blink, punching through the masonry wall. The gunner hid behind and neutralizing the threat instantly. For the next 10 minutes, Elena orchestrated a masterclass in kinetic violence, systematically dismantling enemy heavy weapons teams. But the insurgents were relentless. Then a new sound emerged over the din of battle, a deep, guttural, mechanical roar. "Contact front," a panicked sentry screamed. Armor moving down the main access road. "Alabat. Outworms. And found them." Through the swirling dust, a massive, terrifying shape emerged. It was an industrial bulldozer, grotesquely modified with heavy steel plates welded over the engine and cab. It was a VBIED, a rolling fortress, packed with thousands of pounds of high explosives, barreling straight for the main gate at 20 miles per hour. "Focus fire on that armor," Captain Miller ordered over the comms. Machine gun fire rained down, but the rounds merely sparked off the angled steel. An 84 anti-tank rocket struck the front blade, detonating harmlessly. "It's not stopping," Hayes yelled. "If that hits the gate, the whole front wall comes down." Elena felt a bead of sweat trace down her spine. Standard tactics had failed. She zoomed her optic to maximum magnification, scanning the welded steel plates of the dozer's cab. There, to allow the driver to see, the insurgents had left a single, narrow horizontal slit in the armor no wider than 4 inches, covered by thick ballistic glass. Distance 650 yards, target moving at 20 miles per hour, angle 15 degrees decline. She had one shot. If she missed, the VBIED would breach the gate before she could cycle the heavy bolt. Elena tuned out the screaming radios and the mortar shells exploding 50 yards away. She slowed her heart rate, visualizing the trajectory. She led the target, placing the reticle on empty air ahead of the moving bulldozer, aiming slightly high for bullet drop. Breathe in, breathe out, breathe out. Pause. Her finger pressed the trigger. Boom. The Upiter armor-piercing incendiary tracer round tore through the night sky, a streak of red lightning. 650 yards away, the heavy 50 caliber bullet found the exact center of the 4-inch slit. It shattered the ballistic glass, passed through the driver, and struck the heavy engine block, igniting the fuel lines. The bulldozer violently veered right, crashing into a deep concrete ditch 50 yards outside the main gate. 3 agonizing seconds passed. Then the payload detonated. A massive shockwave ripped across the desert, throwing defenders off their feet. A mushroom cloud of fire and dust rolled into the sky. On the roof, Elena was thrown backward, her ears ringing violently. She crawled back to her rifle. The VBIED was a burning crater of scrap metal, demoralized by the explosion and the phantom sniper. The remaining insurgents melted back into the mountains. "Enemy forces are retreating. Perimeter holds," O'Connor's voice cracked over the radio. An hour later, the sun peaked over the eastern ridge. Elena was back in the armory, a greasy rag in her hand, calmly cleaning the carbon buildup off her bolt. The door opened. It was Hayes. He was covered in soot, looking like he hadn't slept in a week. He walked over to her workbench, but he didn't toss a dirty rifle. Instead, he gently placed a steaming metal mug of black coffee next to her cleaning solvent. "Command is sending a QRF," Hayes said quietly. He shifted his weight, the old arrogance entirely burned away, replaced by reverent awe. "Jenkins, I was wrong. About everything." He stood perfectly straight and offered her a crisp salute. "It's an honor to serve with you, Wraith." Elena looked at the towering breacher, a small smile touching her mouth. "Drink your coffee, Hayes," she said, returning the salute. "We've got weapons to clean." In the dusty armory of Fob Kestrel, Petty Officer First Class Elena Jenkins was no longer just the girl they ignored. She was the shield in the dark, the ghost on the wall, and the deadliest sniper Bravo platoon had ever known. True warriors don't need to brag. Their actions echo louder than any words. If Elena's incredible story of silent resilience and unmatched lethal precision kept you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more untold stories of frontline heroism. Don't forget to ring the bell so you never miss an upload.